In the early 1980s, video games were everywhere. The industry was booming, with companies raking in millions as home consoles became a staple in American entertainment. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Oversaturation, lack of quality control, and corporate greed were poisoning the industry from within. And in 1983, it all came crashing down. How did an industry that once seemed unstoppable completely implode in just a few years? This is the story of the great video game crash of 1983, a cautionary tale of what happens when an industry grows too fast for its own good. By 1980, gaming had become a full-blown cultural phenomenon. Arcades were packed with kids dropping quarters into cabinets like Pac-Man and Space Invaders. At home, the Atari 2600 dominated the market, selling over 30 million units, while third-party developers like Activision were proving that console gaming was here to stay. But the success of the Atari 2600 led to a dangerous shift in the industry. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. By 1982, the market was flooded with competitors, Intellivision, ColecoVision, and countless smaller brands all fighting for a share. The result? An oversaturated market and a downward spiral in game quality. And then came the final nail in the coffin. Two games so infamous they became legends of failure. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Atari had secured the rights to create a home version of Pac-Man, the biggest arcade hit of all time. Expectations were sky high, but when it launched in 1982, it was a disaster. Despite its terrible graphics and gameplay, Atari manufactured 12 million copies, more than the number of Atari consoles in existence. The result? Millions of unsold copies and massive financial losses. But that wasn't the worst of it. That same year, Atari made a legendary mistake, rushing out a game based on Spielberg's blockbuster film, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Atari paid a record-breaking $25 million for the rights to make the game, but they only gave one developer, Howard Scott Warshaw, just 5 weeks to create it. The result was a broken, nearly unplayable mess. Millions of copies sat unsold. Atari tried to hide the disaster by dumping thousands of cartridges in a New Mexico landfill, a move that became one of gaming's greatest urban legends. With consumer confidence shattered, retailers slashed prices to clear out unsold stock. Gaming aisles turned into bargain bins, with titles once worth $40 now selling for just $1 or less. By 1983, the North American video game market had collapsed by over 97%. The industry that had once been worth $3.2 billion was now valued at just $100 million. Major players like Atari, Mattel, and Coleco suffered catastrophic losses, and for the first time, people questioned, was video gaming just a passing fad? It seemed like the end. But while the North American gaming industry lay in ruins, across the Pacific, a Japanese company was quietly preparing to resurrect video games and lead them into a new golden age. That company was Nintendo. The year was 1983. the North American video game industry was dead. Retailers refused to stock consoles, consumers had lost faith, and investors had abandoned gaming entirely. But across the Pacific, a Japanese company under the name of Nintendo had just launched a new console in Japan, the Famicom, and soon they would take an impossible risk, bringing it to America. This is the story of how Nintendo resurrected video games and forever changed the industry. The rebirth of video games would not come from Atari, Coleco, or any of the fallen American giants. Instead, it came from a company that once made playing cards and toys, Nintendo. But first, they had to prove that video games were not dead, starting from Japan. Nintendo wasn't new to gaming. They had found success with arcade hits like Donkey Kong, and their president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, saw a bigger opportunity, a home console that could deliver arcade-quality experiences. The result was the Family Computer, or Famicom. The Famicom was a technical leap forward compared to anything on the market. It had better graphics, better sound, and actual two-player support, but its launch was rocky. Early models had hardware defects, and critics weren't sure it would succeed. Then, something incredible happened. By 1984, the Famicom dominated Japan, selling over 2.5 million units. It was unstoppable. But Yamauchi wanted more. He wanted to bring the Famicom to the United States. There was just one problem. The US gaming market was dead. Retailers wanted nothing to do with video games. To them, consoles were toxic, just another failed toy from a dead industry. So Nintendo had to do something drastic. They needed to rebrand the console completely. To avoid the stigma of video games, Nintendo never called the NES a console. They called it an entertainment system. It came with a futuristic zapper gun, a robotic toy named Rob, and a marketing pitch unlike anything before. Nintendo knew that one game could make or break the NES's launch. That game was Super Mario Bros. When the NES launched in a test market in New York in 1985, the reaction was overwhelming. The graphics, the smooth controls, the revolutionary level design of Super Mario Bros. This was a new era of gaming. But Nintendo didn't just revive gaming, they changed the rules. Unlike Atari, they strictly controlled third-party games, forcing developers to get an official Nintendo seal of quality. This prevented another flood of bad games like in 1983. By 1987, the NES was a runaway success. It had over 20 million units sold in North America alone, and its library exploded with hits like The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Mega Man, and Castlevania. Nintendo had single-handedly revived the gaming industry. But they weren't just dominating America. By the late 80s, they had gone global. The world was in the grip of Nintendo mania. And yet, Nintendo's greatest challenge was still to come. In the early 90s, they would face a new rival, a blue hedgehog, and an all-out console war. The Nintendo vs. Sega era was about to begin.